Alarm screamed through the vessel as she rocked, her psionic snarl echoing through her crew's heads as she slowly turned to face her attacker. "Engineering, report!" barked the aging admiral, as he pushed himself off the console he had slammed against, dusting himself off and fighting his hat, his teeth bared in anger. "Mid-levels have minimal breaching, sir. 4 compartments spaced but sealed off. Multiple deaths, but the old girls are only moving them to new bodies. Several injured, but most of them are more pissed someone shot the Enterprise than anything," came the quick response of the engineering tech, after a moment in the ship's systems, a neural interface core still jacked into the console before them. "Power and Atmos have been rerouted. Defenses are still online and operational. Looks like whatever was used didn't cause much more damage than that. Security isn't reporting borders either, and science isn't picking up anything nasty in the way of microbes or anything on the esoteric side. Looks like we got hit with a pure energy weapon or an overcharged sandblaster," they finished, as they turned to the Admiral with a grimace. "Understood. Sensors, do we have eyes on that hostile?" the Admiral said, as he looked at the view screen showing space around them, as if he could pick out which of the stars was the offender. "Records of that time were showing a high-energy discharge hard to port above our deckline, Admiral. Looking now, accounting for the ship's reorientation," the sensors officer said, as the view centered on a tiny speck. The view screen zoomed in, revealing a small fleet before them, with a larger vessel at the center sporting a partially melted forward cannon, debris drifting off of it as tiny lights had personally crawled over the now disabled ship. "Vox officer, sound general quarters. Sensors, get me a positive ID on that fleet. Deck commander, wake the nest. Prepare for deployment. Fire control, cannon crews to stations," the Admiral said, as he folded his hands behind him, ignoring the urge he felt bubbling from his vessel to bite, to tear. "Sir, not getting any IFF transponders, but we got an ID off the flags on their hulls. Looks like the Kari have a fleet out here. Either rogue elements or we have someone trying to start a war," the census officer reported with a frown, looking at the registry for any match to the ships before them, manually tagging each vessel as hostile, including the biggest of the bunch, which was half the size of the aging Neo-Iowa class. "Understood, Vox officer. Get on the line with the Kauri Naval Officer Command. I want to know what they are playing at here," the old human growled before making a motion. "Engines to half, forward. Escorts to standby formation. Weapons ready. Commander, eagle status," the Admiral asked, as he turned to the deck commander. "Chomping at the bit and waiting to spread their wings, sir," the Saurian raptor said with a growl, their claws carefully poking their console before listening to their headset. The Admiral nodded before looking at the hostile fleet. Said fleet began to move into an attack formation, their weapons charging as they aimed at the approaching human-aligned vessels. "Sir, the Kauri report none of their vessels are in the area," the Vox officer called out as they finished their task, turning to fare their commanding officer with a scowl. "I see," sighed the aging Admiral before he spoke. "Well then, Eagles are clear to launch. Engines to full. All units, engage!" Outside the Enterprise, her main turrets began to rotate as her crews worked, locking each barrel to a different vessel, even as her impulse engines glowed a brighter red, pushing her forward. Below her upper main turrets at the front of her prow, a hatch opened up, as railgun catapults charged up, electricity arced dangerously along them, as fighters were ripped down the launch lines at blinding speeds. They were old, tried-and-true F-15 Stellar Eagles, or SEs, each armed to the teeth with sandblaster cannons, weapons designed to use tiny bits of matter flung at light speeds via mini-Mac cannons, along with more missiles than their old atmospheric predecessors, the 15X, were armed with. These old fighters were flung off her forward catapult before each banked and began to assemble in combat wings, staying out of the line of fire of the 6 massive main turrets. Shortly after deployment, smaller unmanned Delta Wing-shaped fighters deployed, optics glowing as they chirped hungrily over the noosphere, each painted with a species of wolf or fox, pairing up with an SE, before the now hearty-sized fleet of fighters all shot forward, racing towards the enemy fleet. The hostile fleet did not have time to open fire as the escort frigates began to open fire, their main batteries flashing as Mac rounds were flung from them, slowing the smaller vessels, and punched large holes into the oncoming fleet. The massive Neo-Iowa class, on the other hand, began to slow, and then her main cannons barked. accidentally sending a ripple through space as it forced her to slow down, her entire structure shaking in the process. And hollowed out entire vessels upon impact, leaving them drifting through space before the old vessel twisted hard, bringing her rear cannons and roadside cannons to bear, at the cost of one set of her 4 lower cannons being unable to take aim. Not that that was missed much, as she began to fill the void with weapons fire, just as more hostile vessels jumped in and got a face full of mag rounds. Those that managed to avoid the brutal broadside and burned to get out of immediate line of sight soon had to deal with the smaller escort vessels peppering them with missiles and smaller mag rounds. And then, the Eagles and Hounds arrived. The Hounds were the small unmanned fighters, autonomous and were like wolves and foxes, loyal to their fighter and their fighter's pilot, chirping on comms to be let off their metaphorical leashes and allowed to feast. Snarls filled the local noosphere as the fighters dove in, releasing their explosive payloads into opening hangars as they raced past, their cannons unloading into hulls as they flew low to hostile hulls, not letting enemy ADS cannons target them effectively. Critters filled the noosphere as the Hounds began to join the combat runs, their small turrets allowing them to fire behind them like ground-attached gunships, twirling and spinning around their partners. The main ship that had fired upon the Enterprise began to charge up again, aiming its barrel at the biggest target there, the Enterprise herself. Big mistake. The aging vessel twisted her turrets around, every single visible barrel on them, angled down the barrel of the enemy mag cannon, sensors screaming in both allied and hostile ships as her capacitors charged up. And she fired, actually launching herself sideways in the process, her larger, slightly lower and far more numerous mag rounds slamming into the barrel of the enemy weapon. Now, it was called a sandblaster like the weapons of the fighters because it was designed to fling a tiny speck of cheap metal at light speeds. As opposed to the Enterprise, which fired shells made of depleted uranium in tungsten carbide jackets, much more expensive and much, much more effective, as while the tiny speck of metal did pass through the rounds, it couldn't stop them, and by the time it came out the other side, it had lost a lot of energy. But that energy had to go somewhere, and that uranium inside the shells had gotten in. In addition for all the tungsten rounds slamming all together against each other, and the barrel of the empty weapon, the resulting chain reaction caused a devastating explosion, ripping apart the front of the enemy vessel and sending it backwards, superheated metals melting into the vessel, even as the Enterprise shrugged off the speck of metal, not even making a large crater this time on her armor, thanks to the kinetic energy it had lost. Her turrets slowly turned to find more targets, even as her crews marked more vessels dropping in. The Admiral scowled as he watched his forces slowly mopping up the initial enemy units, and dealing with the reinforcements spilling out into the void from FTL. "Vox officer?" he asked, as the ship rocked again as she fired, growling as she hunted. "Get me the Kauri Embassy. Let them know that there's quite a few ships marked as theirs in the area for no forces being here," he growled, rolling his shoulders as he turned to the first mate. "You have the con. I have an ambassador to chew out," he said as he saluted, before walking to the comms console himself, smiling as he heard the much younger officer barking orders out instantly to keep the pressure up.